the Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery. All right, welcome to another episode of the Primitive Patterns Podcast. Today, we're stoked. We got John Baker on the pod. He's a chiropractic physician. I think that's what I read in his Instagram bio. That's what we'll go with for now. And he's the co-owner, I believe, of Swell Wellness, which is a practice down on the North Shore of Hawaii. We've been following John for a while. He works with a lot of cool people, and we really like what he's doing. So, John, how's it going? And if you could just tell our audience who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, so my name is Dr. John Baker. Like you said, I co-own a practice called Swell Wellness out here on the North Shore of Oahu. I'm a chiropractic physician. I like to tell people I do physical medicine because I do a lot more than adjusting. I was a strength and conditioning coach in San Diego and Chicago for probably about half a dozen years before going to get my doctorate. And I worked with a lot of like everyday people, but also like youth through professional athletes. So I incorporate a lot of like movement and like neuromuscular reeducation into my care, along with a lot of like body work and osteopathic work. So a lot of times when I say chiropractor, people think I just sit there and adjust people for like 10 minutes at a time, which isn't like the most accurate thing. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, dude. I mean, we first started following you probably a little while ago now. And in particular, one thing that really caught our eye, I'm sure you get this all the time, is some of the people that you work with and the demographic that you work with, especially when it comes to water sport athletes, in particular, big wave surfing. And I mean, being in Hawaii, I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand, especially like you said, with your background in strength conditioning and working with athletes. And you get to Hawaii, and obviously we all know the type of athlete that tends to crawl around there. So if you could just like give us a little bit of information, maybe with like who you work with and how you're able to use your skill set in helping, whether it's big wave surfers. Obviously one of the guys is Landon McNamara, for any surf fans that are listening to the podcast. John works one-on-one with him. So just give us like a bit of background on that, how you got into that and what your experience has been like.
Yeah. So how I got into it kind of really starts in my undergrad. I was a lifeguard, an EMT for the city of San Diego, and I was living on a sailboat my first year doing that. And I didn't really know anyone down there. So I was going to school in Orange County and not San Diego. And I just got really into surfing. So that kind of became like a little passion of mine. And then moving out here, that started because when I was in school getting my doctorate, I got hooked up with this guy that started teaching at our school. He used to work with the World Surf League and American Beach Volleyball. So he connected me to a good mentor of mine now named Dr. Tim Brown. He's out of Newport Beach. And he is the medical director of the World Surf League and has worked with, you know, crazy athletes from Kobe Bryant to Bob Burnquist and skateboarding to John Florence and surfing and tons of like MMA guys and stuff like that. So we were trying to figure out, like me and my wife, where to set up our practice. And we were thinking maybe Southern California. And then he was kind of saying, he was like, you know, there's no one really out there on the North Shore doing like the caliber of work that you do and the way that you do it. Just food for thought. And we were kind of like, okay, well, shoot, if the world needs somebody to go to the North Shore of Oahu,
Done.
I'm down for that. So we came out here and, I just got really fortunate, like really quickly to get hooked up with Landon. Just met him around town one night, and he was suffering with some shoulder stuff, and the Eddie competition was coming up. And for those that don't know, that's like the Super Bowl of big wave surfing and stuff like that. It's like it's a very large competition, huge cultural significance out here. So like our goal was to like win the Eddie. And in my mind, it was kind of like, of course, but I didn't really think he was like the favorite, you know, sorry, Landon, if you listen to this. But it was like, all right, cool. If that's the goal, like that's the goal, like let's freaking make it happen. So we just kind of like tried to dial that in really hard. And I remember the night before, I was sitting there with my wife, just like eating dinner or something like that, maybe like watching something on YouTube or something like that. And I was like, I have this really weird feeling that like Landon's going to win tomorrow. And I was working with some other athletes that were in the event, and I didn't have that feeling about them. And yeah, sure enough, one day later, I'm sitting there with Landon at the end of the event, like being like, holy shit, dude, like we did it. Like that was insane.
Unreal.
And that kind of sparked the whole thing. So I work with like Landon. I work with people like Billy Kemper and John Florence and some other like big names around here, and then also some people passing through. But what I do with them really depends on like what their need is. So like Landon really didn't have that much like stability and like strength in certain like joint positions. So we've really tried to like dial in like the way that his body recruits different muscles and moves different joints like preferentially, because he's had a lot of injuries that are like pretty severe. So his body definitely like adapted to like work around those injuries. So for him, it's been really about like unwinding those patterns to try to reorient the way that his brain decides to move in really highly dynamic or really highly forceful situations. And then other people like John, like I don't really do much movement stuff with him. And that's typically just more about sessions like bodywork oriented sessions to try to get things to basically sit better after like his super intense like surfing and I guess just wear and tear on his body, to try to just like reset normal and allow him to perform at like a super high level, doing whatever it is that he wants to do. I mean, that dude's an animal. Like if it's not surfing, it's, riding his Hobie cat as fast as he possibly can around the water, or downwind foiling for like miles and miles and miles. But yeah, it's kind of always a blend of like whatever the person needs. Sometimes it's even like organ work. Like I work with a guy just down the road who's a pretty prominent surfer who, like he's got some organ stuff. So like with him, I just try to like work on like getting his stomach to kind of like disengage from the diaphragm, so the diaphragm can move and his lungs can move a little bit better, because he gets a lot of pain kind of like up in this region that doesn't really resolve from tissue work or adjusting and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, and man, like surfers are a crazy demographic to work with. I mean, I guess you could really call upon that for any athlete when it comes to, but let's take surfing as an example, because that's the hot topic of this conversation right now. But I mean, the body isn't necessarily built to be laying prone in an extended position through the spine on a surfboard in big waves, and like you said, like that dynamic, unstable situation when you're in the water. And so when you're working with somebody like Landon or any surfer, you mentioned that he needed to work on his stability. Now, I've had this like conversation or debate, if you want to call it, with a number of people, especially being down in Guatemala, because some people, especially in the surf community, have this preconceived notion of what let's call sport specific training in a gym setting looks like for them, because the median in which they compete or perform on, which is a surfboard on an unstable surface. How much merit or how much value do you place in working on unstable surfaces in a gym setting with a surfer, because it's, quote unquote sport specific? Do you incorporate any of that within their training? That it's a hard hitting question for me, because I'm not even going to like say my stance as of this point, but I just want to kind of hear what you have to say, because, you work with these guys on a daily basis.
Yeah. So I think that brings up like a really interesting question that I'm sure, like you said, there you get 1,000 different answers from 1,000 different people.
Yeah.
But my standpoint is like, right, surfing is really unique in the sense that like, other than maybe like, powder snowboarding or skiing, like it's probably like the most naturally unstable sport. So like when I think of like an NFL lineman, like if you're an interior lineman, like you play like nose guard or center, you're really not doing that much. Like it's very high contact, very high force, but you have a lot of support. You have the people next to you that you might be bouncing off of. You have a really hard surface. you're pushing against another massive man that might as well just be like a moving wall, you
Yeah.
know? So I think that like things like a hack squat, a barbell back squat, a deadlift really carry over really well to that sport or that position. But surfing is really dynamic and fluid. But that being said, like I don't really do much like probably what a lot of people would consider like unstable training. I try
Yeah.
to select movements that are inherently like self-limiting. So we do a lot of like split position stuff, so like split squat or like lunge position holds while like say doing a cable chop. Like I think a lot of people might be like underwhelmed by like how Instagram sexy some of the exercises are because they'd be expecting like crazy Bosu balls and
Yeah.
like all these like perturbation things, but and it's always a progression, right? But you know, I think that using things like tempo, like I think even just the fact of like, can you hold a squat at parallel for 3 seconds under load and not break your your positional tolerance in that position is, in my opinion, working on stability. If you're doing like, I do a lot of like DNS stuff, which is kind of similar to like gymnastica. I don't know if you guys know either of those, but
Okay.
those things to do well are really difficult. So I think like moving slow, holding isometrics in certain positions, doing a lot of stuff unilaterally as opposed to bilaterally satisfies what I'm looking for in like the unstable positions. You know, and for example, some of that might be like instead of doing a shoulder press, we're going to do an unsupported shoulder press or a Z press on the ground. Or instead of doing a split squat, we're going to do a split squat where we're only like unilaterally loading it. So holding it in one hand. Or maybe what we're going to do is like float the front heel. So we have to get used to like actually coordinating that front foot and the intrinsic muscles of the foot into the ground and really paying a lot of attention to when you're surfing, like these guys are surfing a lot. Like I don't think they need much more practice on like an ultra sports specific realm. Like they're out there for hours and hours a day. Like
I agree.
I'm not trying to mimic that. I'm just trying to mimic the positions in a kind of a unique way that's really focusing on like how is your rib cage and your pelvis orienting? How is your foot actually in contact with the ground? Like when you're coming up out of that split squat, are you rolling to the outside of your foot? Because if you do that and then you're on a surfboard and that's your strategy to get out of a crouch, well then the board's going to veer. You know, like are you actually like even on the foot? When you come out of a squat, are you like lurching with your low back, or are we actually like recruiting the glute muscles and the leg muscles and able to stabilize the ankle and the knee and the hip throughout that process? So I kind of look at like it's a lot of like stability work, but it's definitely not on like unstable surfaces. We're just paying really high attention to the quality of the movement. Because also like, let's be honest, like these guys don't need to be like that big. Like there's a cap at like where the efficiency of like increased strength decreases. Like once they get to like I would say probably like the strength of like a weak D1 football player, they're probably fine. Like if they're as strong as a wide receiver or a cornerback, that's good. They don't need to be like freaks of nature. But how well can they coordinate that with like changing the tempo, adding an isometrics, changing the way the loading is, whether it's high, low, unilaterally positioned, I think is like much more important. And I think the brain, you know, just needs those unique challenges in a more like stable setting like the gym to then be able to figure out slowly as they go incorporate that into their like surf training or their practice, however you want to think about it, how to do those things in the water. But I think a lot of people, you know, if you're moving poorly and then you're just moving on an unstable surface in the gym as well, you're just building in a tall building on top of like kind of shoddy foundation. And then, you know, people are like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how my knee hurt. Like all I did was a basic turn. It's like, well, you went into the gym and you did some BS that basically taught your brain to use your knee poorly. So like, it makes total sense to me that you had like a non-contact knee injury because you taught your brain to sacrifice the knee in order to create torque because you didn't know how to use your hips or your breath and your diaphragm to like coordinate your core and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. Very similar to my stance that I would take as well. I mean, I don't have too much experience working with surfers, so I can only speak to this so much. We do work with a couple pro surfers in Guatemala. The one kid is the male champion, and then the woman is the female champion, and so they take it very serious, and they're relatively high level, right? My mindset is like, if you're able to gain strength, general strength through the human body, if you're able to gain some muscle, maintain or gain general mobility, if you're able to work on all those qualities that, and you're not working on it from a sports specific lens, you're working on it from a human, more like, if you want to call it holistic lens, where you're just trying to make the human body perform better, then what I've found, especially with the two surfers in Guatemala, like once they started loading up pull-ups and they started hitting like heavier front rack split squats or whatever, like their confidence grew, right? And they were so pumped on the fact that week after week they started to feel stronger. Maybe they started to see more muscle growth or more tone. What my view on what I was helping them with was building their confidence and building the general qualities of their body, in hope that through that process they enter the water a more confident athlete, and then those physiological adaptations can actually take place in the water, and maybe they are able to express that general strength on their surfboard now. And I've had that debate with like a number of people, especially like a couple surfers on the beach that are into the whole unstable surface training. And it was a tough argument to get across. And I'm wondering, like, have you ever felt any resistance from a surfer that wants to come work with you and they already have this preconceived notion? Because like you said, maybe they've seen the sexy Bosu ball, unstable surface training on Instagram, and they come to you because you're a reputable name in Hawaii. They see that you work with surfers and they're like maybe a little bit surprised as to what you do. And you have to explain to them or show them through the process of training why what you do is going to be beneficial for them. Like, have you ever had to have that encounter with an athlete?
Yeah. And first off, like I 100% agree with you. Like what we're really doing is building like athletes. And if you're a good athlete, you'll perform well in pretty much whatever you do. And the brain is one of those things where like a lot of times it holds itself back when it senses like the fear of failure, right? It's like why if you're deadlifting, you can deadlift more with like straps or chalk on your hands because like the brain's like, oh, we got this. So I think it's exactly that. We're teaching the brain to have confidence under load in like a threatening situation. So that way it can perform better before, like in the water. But yeah, what was really funny was before the Eddy, Landon, we were doing a lot of like, we weren't doing a lot, but we had some like plyometric, like jump training in there and a lot of like hops and single leg lands and stuff like that. And he's gotten like so much better, but he was not very good at it to begin with. And I would like kind of laugh at him. I'm like, yeah, dude, it appears like you've only ever spent life in water.
Right.
Like you're so bad at like landing on one foot. Like you don't really know how to jump very well. And he was kind of like, this seems like some football shit, man. And I was like, there might be a time here pretty soon where you have to take like a 40-foot drop, 50-foot drop and like stick it. So like, how is this any different than that?
Right. Yeah.
And he was just kind of like, okay, like whatever, like I trust you. And then the day after the Eddy, I saw him and we were working together and I was like, hey man, so like that jump training that you thought was kind of bullshit turned out to be kind of important yesterday, huh?
Yeah,
and he was like, I was actually thinking about that last night. He was like, you were totally right about that. He was like, I'm sorry.
That's unreal. Yeah. Cause I think it's in the surf community. And I mean, granted, like if you really enjoy doing that stuff, and it's not necessarily taking place of, if you want to call it traditional strength conditioning, like if you're still getting that stimulus in, like you said, whether it's through the plyometric and like the muscle tendon, or you're getting the strength training in, like whatever it is, if you're still hitting those things and you want to like bounce around on a trampoline or you want to like hit a 360 onto a Bosu ball, it does come back to the point of like, well, we're trying to build more confident athletes. And if they view that 30-minute practice 3 days a week where they are doing those things as valuable and it's aiding in their confidence in the water, then who am I to say? I've never stood up on a big wave. You know what I mean? I barely stand up on small waves on a big board. So like, who am I really to say what's right or wrong? But I do think if you're looking at it from like a physiological adaptation standpoint and what's going to be best for the human body to build strength and muscle and all those qualities, it's like, it's undeniable that that classic strength conditioning isn't going to hurt you. Like there's that classic line, strength is never a weakness. And I don't think anybody can really argue with that. Added strength is never going to hurt you. But that conversation of if that helps the athlete feel more confident in what they do in their sport, then all the power to you.
And I like what John said too, just about like, you know, these guys are spending multiple hours, and no matter the athlete, if you're a high level athlete and a high level performer, you're spending multiple hours a day doing the actual sport. So you're getting all of the stimulus that you need, the sport specific
Skill,
training,
practice,
by just doing the sport. And you know, we're Canadian boys, so we've trained a lot of hockey players, and there's a lot of stuff going around online of like sport specific training for hockey players, and some crazy wild drills that you see online where it's like, oh yeah, you know, do this cable exercise to have a better wrist shot. It's like, no, just line up 100 pucks, go on the ice and shoot them, and you're probably going to have a better wrist shot because of that.
Yeah.
So I think it does come down to like, you really need to value your time in the sport, and then your general strength and conditioning. And then if you have the capacity from a recovery standpoint and a mental standpoint, yeah, throw in the Bosu ball trampoline stuff, like no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, like when I used to work with like football players in Chicago, we would do like the facilities that I was at specifically, I'm thinking about, was really cool. We had a big turf field in there, and we would do like lifting classes. And then we would also do like skill classes. And the lifting classes, we would do like, say like maybe like sprint 10 yards, chop to a stop at a cone, or like sprint and then like cut 90 degrees. But they were really there more for like the ability to like create and decelerate from like force production, versus like the skill classes would be more like, you know, working on the footwork of it, working on like tracking a ball or something like that. And I think like, you know, I almost did an internship at Northwestern University in their strength program in Chicago. And at their facility for their divers, they have like, you know, like where you would have like a kids gymnastics party, like a foam pool, basically, where they can like practice that stuff. And I think like, yeah, if you want to go do that, like that's totally fine. Like whatever makes you feel better at the end of the day and more confident going into it, even if it's just placebo effect, right? Like that's still powerful too.
Fuck yeah.
But I think it's important to kind of like delineate that those are two separate things.
Right.
Like you have like your sport, and then you have like your strength or rehab, and then you have this other like ancillary stuff that if you want to fill your time with that, that's great. But you can't do all of them at the same time the best you would want to. So I try to just stay in my lane, do the things I do really well. And if somebody wants to go on like a skateboard to the skate park and practice like things like that, like great. That's not my thing. I don't know how to like replicate that in a gym setting that's going to be under like adequate load, adequate tension, and like mimic the right force vectors to like create the adaptation I'm looking for without just sacrificing a bunch of time, because people are just paying for my time at the end of the day. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible with that.
And, you know, with the whole essentially conversation up to this point being based around performance for surfing, I kind of want to keep it on that trend. And so because of the demographic that you work with, what are some common injuries or presentations of surfers through movement mechanics, just alignment through the body, nagging, aches, pains that they come to you with? What are some like super common problems that you see through probably like neck, shoulder, spine? And what's like a couple good pieces of advice that you could give to somebody that spends multiple hours a week or a day, on a surfboard and complains about some pain experiences or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So the most common ones I see are probably like low back and then like shoulder/neck. And some people call it shoulder pain. Some people call it neck pain. but it's really just in like that whole like shoulder, girdle, neck, nape region. So I kind of could just consider it like one area. But typically the underlying factor for that I see is like they just don't know how to like use their core properly. So like when we think about the core, right, we have the diaphragm, then we have the pelvic floor, which kind of are almost like the top and bottom of a shock on your like truck or your dirt bike or something like that. And when the diaphragm goes down, it should push the abdominal wall out 360 degrees to create like a fully pressurized cylinder. And what that should do too is as that goes out, the pelvic floor should come up and it should create almost like, I think about it almost like the ball on like a Dyson vacuum.
Okay.
You know, like those big balls. And that allows for like really fluid rotational stability. And what that does is it also helps stabilize the pelvis for efficient hip movement. So when the hips move well, the low back doesn't have to like flex and extend so much to like pump down the line or make turns because the hips can do their job. If you watch Kelly Slater, one thing that I think sets him apart with his longevity in the sport is that he has a straight spine so much more than other people, even though he has like a scoliosis, which you think would be a predisposing factor to like a earlier career ending. Like his back doesn't take the amount of load because he's able to stabilize through there so well and he uses hips more. But then the other side of that is the top half, where it stabilizes the rib cage a lot more and allows for more thoracic extension and more of like a mobile neck at the thoracic cervical junction. And what a lot of people do is they don't have that stability in the low back from the breath in their entire abdominal wall. They might look like they have a great six pack, but that's only covering like 1/4 of the whole cylinder.
Right.
So what ends up happening is they end up like cranking their lumbar spine and like locking out their actual like spinal joints for stability, which wears them down over time. And then the other part of that is that they end up having to like really use their like traps and their neck muscles, primarily like the scalenes, to help stabilize the shoulder because the rib cage isn't stable. So the scapula can't be stable. So what I do a lot of is trying to get people to like reorient their brain to properly like ballooning out their abdomen 360 degrees. So that way, when they're paddling on the board, a lot of that tension is actually going into like the internal and external obliques to create that stability as opposed to like their lumbar spine. And then actually getting them to be able to like reach overhead and use their serratus to pull that scapula through into that upward rotation, as opposed to like lifting up and then like reaching. Because a lot of that, like when they reach up like that, it's fine. But by the time these guys get to like their late 20s or 30s, depending on how much they're surfing or the injuries that they've had, you know, they start to experience like disc herniations or like IVF where like the nerve comes out, like irritations and stuff like that. And they get nerve symptoms, or they just get like lagging pains, or their muscles are just so tight that it's like cranking on the, I don't know, the peripheral nerves or the joints or whatever it is for the given situation, and just causes them to like constantly be in this little loop. And there's no way you can like ice bath or sauna your way out of that.
Right.
Like you might be able to recover enough to go do it the next day, but until you correct that pattern, it's just going to keep coming back. And I know a lot of people like, they're like, oh, you need stronger shoulders to kind of go back to what we were saying. So they do like shoulder presses, but it's like you're shoulder pressing in the same sort of way.
Right.
And until these people really learn how to like utilize their breath and stabilize their shoulder from the muscles that attach more like on the lateral side of the rib cage, they're just going to keep going around in that. So I do a lot of work with that, and it makes really profound changes really quickly, because I like to think about it like the brain is kind of like water flowing down a mountain. Like it's going to try to find the path of least resistance.
Yep.
But sometimes there's just something in the way that's like bucking it off the most efficient path. But when you teach the brain how to coordinate those things and how to recruit those muscles properly, all of a sudden it starts self-selecting that in their weight training workouts, how they're picking up their groceries, how they're picking up their kids, how they're paddling. And that makes massive changes in pretty good amounts of time.
Right. And so obviously there's no like one size fits all approach. Every athlete has, you know, an individual experience and body that's going to bias certain movement patterns and maybe cause certain issues. But for any of the listeners that are like just general surfers and they experience some of those, they're like, oh, fuck yeah. You know what? Like this dude's right. My low back does always hurt, or like, you know, my neck is always tight. As a coach, are there any specific movements that you tend to have a bias towards, or like as a general recommendation that somebody can do
kind of like here and now to help alleviate that problem, or at least like take a shot at the board and see if it helps?
For sure. So my typical starting places with people is just getting them to learn how to like really diaphragmatic breathe, and like belly breathing in yoga is like super popular. And a lot of the surfers kind of follow like this whole like hollowing thing, which I don't really get.
Okay.
And some people love it, but it's not something I've ever really found much success with. But to just lay on their back and take their hands like this and put their thumbs right in like the love handle region, like right above the pelvis, below the rib cage, and that little like fleshy gap.
Yep.
And just really try to like learn to breathe into there. And then from there, I pretty much just move them to dead bug, where they're not like reaching their arms, but I'm having them breathe into their thumbs, hold that tension, slowly lower their leg, not even fully extending the leg. The knee stays about at 90 degrees. So just the hips moving, and try to tap their heel on the ground and like lower over 3 seconds and raise over 3 seconds. And that exposes a lot of like proficiency gaps for people really quickly. They'll start shaking. They won't be able to do it. Their ribs will start flaring. They'll start like lifting their pelvis and kind of like twisting or torquing themselves. And I think that's a phenomenal place to start for that whole thing. And then once they get that, then I think every single movement they do in the gym turns into just a progression of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then for the shoulder, I really like a prone press up, which I think is kind of called like a sphinx pose in like yoga. I'm not really sure, but people lay prone. Same thing. They breathe in the same way. I have them put their hands equal with their temples, just a little bit farther out.
Yep.
And press through their whole forearms and hands to kind of lift their chest off the ground. Really trying to make sure they don't overly extend through their lumbar spine. There's like a nice, smooth, natural spinal curve. And to really make sure they're like pressing and feeling that contraction through their serratus and the side of their rib cage and stuff like that.
Right. So essentially you're getting somebody to lay on their stomach. Like when you say prone, for anybody that doesn't know what that means, it's like laying on your stomach, like having your face facing the floor. And they have their hands in line with their temple, and they're driving through their whole forearm, trying to get their shoulder blade to wrap around their rib cage. Almost the opposite to like think about pinching a pencil between your shoulder blades in the center of the spine. Like think of the opposite of that, laying on your stomach, hands in line with the temple, driving through the forearms, getting big through the upper back. That's right. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
and one
cool.
thing that a lot of people do is when they go to do that movement, they just end up going like that and like rounding through their back.
Yep.
So really trying to like get people to understand the differentiation between just rounding through their thoracic spine versus keeping their thoracic spine somewhat in like a slight extended position and actually moving through the shoulder blades. Because to the person doing it, right, we're like goal-oriented people. This is how we develop the imbalances that wind themselves up into my office typically. You're just thinking, okay, how do I accomplish the movement? How do I get my shoulders away from my spine? And a lot of people move the spine versus instead of moving the shoulder blade.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, dude. Well, I think we'll pretty well cut it there, but I highly recommend like anybody that's listening to this podcast, if you take your surfing seriously, or, you're just dealing with some general aches and pains through that surfing, I highly recommend checking John out. I mean, we've been following his stuff for a long time, and there's obviously some alignment there. And I think he just follows a very, for lack of a better term, holistic approach, and a very sensible common knowledge approach as well, which is actually funny enough, tough to find these days, I feel like. So we really appreciate what you do. We value what you do. So if you can quickly, before you go, just like plug your social, where people can find you, if and how they can work with you, all that stuff.
Yeah. So, my personal Instagram account is at watermandoc. That's waterman.doc. And my company's or my practice's Instagram is at Swell Wellness Hawaii. They can reach out to me there if they have any questions. They can follow along just by following or adding it to their favorites. And if anyone wants to schedule like a consult or something like that, like an online consult, I do that with people. If people have questions before a big surf trip, or they're just dealing with something, I do offer options to work with people remotely. And those are quite well working as well.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, yeah, thanks so much for your time. And hopefully
we see him on the North Shore of Hawaii one day.
That'd be electric, wouldn't it?
We've yet to go there. So, yeah, we would love to head out there and see you and what you guys are all about.
Yeah, well, if you're out here, let me know for sure. We'll get you in the practice, try to help you with anything you guys got going on. Or
this guy's got a nagging shoulder. So
buddy, you'll have some work to do if I show up, trust me.
All right. Well, I got work to do every day, so might as well be you.
Let's go.
The Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery.